You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners, so let's be friends. Welcome to the second part of our summer buffet. Later on in the show, we're going to catch up with Tommo from the Cool Down podcast about what's happened in the F1 fan space, in general, on social media and at the tracks. We're going to be speaking to our friends at Formula Nerds about the Junior Series. Which ones should we follow? Is it good racing to watch? And who are the stars of the future? But let's kick off this week by talking about some racing rules. And I'm delighted to be joined by an expert, someone who gets to write about Formula One for a living and produce on motorsport. We're joined by the head of production at Driver 61 and Driven Media. It's Callum McIntyre. Appreciate your time, Callum. Hello.
Hey, Spanners. Thanks for having me. Awesome to be on the show. I've been listening a long time.
You have a better job than me, so I'm very, very jealous. Describe what your role is.
I manage a couple of YouTube channels, basically. So we've got Driver 61, which is about motorsport and Formula One. I'm sure a lot of the audience may have seen those videos as well, where Scott, who used to be a pro racing driver, breaks down Formula One. I'm an engineer, so I write a lot about the cars on there as well. And then we have another channel, which is in the automotive space. So taking what we learned from Driver 61 and applying it to the world of cars. And that is, well, growing really fast. It's a year old. We're up to 250,000 subscribers. But we do silly things with cars, basically.
And what have you been up to lately? I know, but how much can you tease? How much can you tell us?
We drove up to Scotland last week. It was 9 hours of driving altogether in some cars. And then I was at the track yesterday. We're trying to make a Subaru faster than a supercar for a series on a budget. And we put some new tyres on the car and did some, I'd say, nerdy testing on the track. But it was a lot of fun.
Does it have to already be quite a good car that you're just doing up? For example, my beloved Peugeot 2008, it's got a roof box and everything. Is that something we could soup up?
Probably. I don't know. Has it got a turbo? You might be able to do some engine management stuff on it.
It's got an eco engine, Callum. 1.2 litre.
Well, to be honest, ours isn't that super. It's a Subaru WRX, but we got the estate. We figured out that the estate was $2,000 cheaper than the saloon, but wasn't $2,000 slower. So we bought that, and then it was it's 220 brake horsepower, but we're gonna take that up. I think we're hoping for about 350, 400 horsepower once it's done. And
it's got to beat your supercar on a track.
On a track, yeah. So Scott in a Lamborghini, he picked a Murcielago. He went a bit easy on us. He went for like similar era.
Right.
And then, we're in a estate Subaru.
So
but we're getting there.
Your driver expert, Scott Mansell, no relation?
He's not a relation to Nigel. His dad does restore Formula One cars for a living, though. So he is in that space. Yeah.
Hey, look, don't worry. We'll have links in the show notes below so you can go and check out all of Callum's work and Driver 61 and Driven Media. But you and I got chatting basically because of your TikToks. You're a TikTok sensation, and you had some sim racing videos on there which were basically you causing various accidents and then examining why it was your fault. And obviously we do a very similar thing, whose fault is it as well. And I just think like examining those kind of incidents, particularly the ones you caused on sim racing, are so good to do as fans.
Totally. They're not all my fault. It came out of, you'll know, Spanners, if you're on iRacing.
Yeah.
There's a voice chat there. So if you have a crash with someone, normally it ends up in a heated discussion.
Yes.
Of you saying, no, it was your fault. And then them saying, no, it was my fault. And then normally you go back and look at the replay and you can actually arrive at a consensus. Normally it's like, okay, sorry. But I thought it would make some engaging TikTok content.
Isn't it amazing how
it
any kind of incident on sim racing and karting, and I'm sure this is going to be the same for the F1 drivers, is that any incident that you're in, no way does it feel like your fault. Like, it always feels like you did everything you could to avoid the accident.
Yeah, particularly in sim racing, I think, because you have such a narrow field of view. Even if you've got triple monitors, like that, you're still limited in your vision.
VR,
and
come
so
on,
often
Callum.
It seems like a car arrives from nowhere and took you out, when actually it could be that, your line wasn't great. It was probably your fault. You're going in too hot. But TikTok thrives off engagement. And so actually discussions in the comments were only a good thing. And so it kind of it went from there. Now, I used to only post the ones I was fairly confident weren't my fault. And then even if it was my fault and I knew it was my fault and I apologized, I'd still show it. Because often they did better because everyone in the comments was shouting, saying, Callum, it was your fault.
So, but if you look at like F1, there's a political element as well, where they're playing to the referee a certain amount as well. They can't just go, oh, that was my bad. But you do just get that genuine belief that no one ever thinks they cause an accident, even if they've just like chinned them from 5 cars back. They never go, whoops, that's not going to look good at the stewards.
Yeah, you're right, actually, is that. But after the race in sim racing, you can have a discussion and be cool about it. And I bet Lewis and Max, after a few of them, did, have a chat or have at least, some sort of discussion about it. But you're right. Once you're in it and the stewards can hear everything on team radio, you're not going to say, that was my bad.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know what would happen if they had live in, driver to driver comms. I'm pretty confident that's never going to happen. But actually, what I wanted to kick off with today is racing rules in general. So we sort of have to learn a different set of racing rules for every motorsport discipline. But there are some universal ones. But you were telling me that F1 rules are quite a bit different to other forms of racing. Why is that?
I would say so. When you look at lower formulas, from some of the, lower down the open seater route, I watch a lot of Mazda racing from the US.
All right.
They have some epic racing there, like
MX-5s?
5 wide. Yeah. Like 5 wide going into what was it, Turn 4 at Road America. Like they're much more rugged. They get away with some wheel banging, some door banging, and they can race like that and they know it. It's the same in karting, really. When you've got bumpers on a kart, I feel like everyone naturally treats that sort of side to side knocking as that's racing. Formula One, they can't have that because it becomes an airplane crash really fast. So that's part. That's part of it, I think.
In karting, for example, if there's a right-hander followed by a left-hander and I squeeze someone on the first part of that corner, then you've got to negotiate how far you're both going to go to the entry to the next corner. So I can park myself in the middle of the road and go, by the way, this is as far right as I'm going. And the guy on my left will know that because he hits me. And that's kind of accepted. But in Formula One, I guess, and any open wheeler, you have to have more set rules about that. And I often feel in F1, there's like an unwritten expectation of how a car is meant to position themselves, which can be very hard to interpret.
Totally. And I think last year, particularly, that was more unwritten than it is this year.
Yeah.
It is like they've come out with these new racing rules, and maybe we'll have discussion about that. Maybe they're not exactly the right wording for what we're aiming at, but they're certainly a step in the right direction. But I think in racing, if you watch, sports cars as well, they have a totally different set of rules altogether in that it's multi-class, and they're often quite aggressive. You'll have a class up LMP2 sending it from miles back saying you're going to have to get out of the way, otherwise we're having a big shunt. In Formula One, that's not really okay.
Do you want to give us a bit of a primer then on what the racing rules are that have been established? So I'm treating you like Wikipedia, but or like a smart speaker. Callum, what are the new F1 rules?
Broadly, I think to me, it's about whether you're alongside or not, right? So if you've got a car that is in the braking zone alongside, you need to leave them room. And you can get into arguments about what you call alongside, whether it's like your front wheel is between their 2 axles or however you want to describe that. It's like you need to leave space for a car to be there. So they have a fair fight for the corner. Now, you get into some difficulties when through a long sweeping corner, you have part of the corner where you're going to be alongside and part where you're not, and discussing, who has the racing line. Broadly, last year, it was whoever gets to the apex first can do what they like. that was kind of the unwritten, the rule that was.
Enforced.
I mean, it wasn't unwritten because the stewards kind of ruled on it.
Yeah, it's how they enforce it. So they were enforcing via precedent almost.
Yeah, I think so.
So this year, yeah. Sorry, Callum. So this year, I thought the rule was only pertaining to the outside car. So if the outside car has gotten ahead by the apex, they're entitled to racing room on the exit. If they haven't got as far as getting ahead by the apex, they can be Verstappen/Hamilton off the road on the exit.
Yeah. And I think we saw that in Silverstone. Was it Lewis on Perez? Perez came across coming out of Luffield and Lewis backed out. Like he knew, I haven't got a fight here. I'm going to back out and, live to fight another corner. So we saw that, I think. Whereas there have been other incidents where it's been tougher to call. Like, was it Perez around the outside of George?
Yes,
in Austria.
Yeah.
Like that one to me was a bit more difficult because like who was ahead at the apex? It was really hard to judge that. You could judge that a number of ways, and also Perez didn't use all the track.
Yes.
So again, the stewards have got a really hard job, but there should be some rules that are stated to
they've taken a step in the right direction, I think, with that one. And also in Austria, there was an incident where I think it was Sainz. He actually got shoved off the road when he was entitled to room. So when he came back on with an advantage, he didn't get a penalty because I think he was adjudged that, well, he should have had racing room. He's come back on the track safely, and then he's been able to carry on. So it's a start, but actually that example with Perez is a really good one. Also, similarly, trigger warning, Silverstone 2021, where you could argue Verstappen, he had room to his left. A lot of Verstappen fans would argue that Hamilton had to take the exit, which is not a rule that I believe exists. But there isn't really a rule to how much the outside car can squeeze. So is Verstappen entitled to just squeeze as much as he can and force that inside car to the inside? Was Perez entitled to do that to Russell? That's still an area that we don't know the rules.
That's true, actually. You put it well there in that for Verstappen, I don't want to trigger anyone here, but like he could have left more room. He would have been conceding the corner, but he could have left more room. But you're right. There's no rule to say you need to give this much room, or you need to use all of the available. You need to leave as much as possible. Like as soon as you start saying that, you're dictating who's ahead. You're choosing who wins that battle. I think if you dictate an amount of space. With that, I mean, I've listened to the podcast for a while, Spanners. I think I know what your view is on that corner. I'm not sure if I fully agree. It's totally within. I know you don't like to. It's totally within racing incident. Yeah. But it's like where you put the majority of that blame in that whenever you've got two cars battling, it's never going to be 100%, 0%. There's always going to be some overlap. But yeah, I think if you're going into there from the inside, and you're trying to do it as cleanly as possible, you don't carry in the same speed as you would if you're coming from the optimum racing line. You make sure you leave room for the outside car.
Yeah.
Now, both of them could have done more.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I'm not overly upset with Hamilton being deemed to have been mostly at fault there and in fact getting a penalty, whereas Verstappen's actions were more or less self-policing at the time. So, as in he put a squeeze on, he could have left more room. That ended up putting him out of the race. So there's an element of self-policing, but last year it was very let them race. So that may be political as well, but this year the stewards have come in very much with no, race within the track limits for one thing and within our rules. Do you think we should be moving towards a clearer set of rules, or was it okay kind of in the Wild West? I'm trying to imagine like football matches where there's no offside rule, but you just go kind of, if it feels right, then it's not offside. And do you know what I mean? That's how it kind of felt last season.
Yeah, I'm in two minds, right? Last year, I was watching it. I'm someone who watches Formula One for the racing. Like, I think there are broadly three types of fans. There are the F1 tech people. I mean, I'm kind of in that realm as well.
Nerd.
There are the people
Yep.
that love it as a sport, and love all the driver stuff going on and like how the teams are doing. And then the people that will watch any racing. Now I'm in that category, and I loved the racing that went on last year. But and actually that racing in a lot of other categories, not all of them, would have been fine. In my opinion, like you could take a lot of instances and compare them to others, like particularly in the Mazdas, but also in Formula 3 and in IndyCar and in Indy Lights and a few other series. But I don't think in Formula 1, we learned this last year, you can do that. It has to be a bit stricter. It's like if you're at the Champions League and you're doing offside calls on gut feel, like there's a lot at stake. So I think that fair rules and accurate policing of them is the right way to go.
So in all forms of, you're doing, hang on, I'm careful of what I'm allowed to say and not allowed to say. You do some racing, and let's say that you have experience in real life racing, at least the study of it. What I find hardest, karting with some of our guys who are really good, or sim racing with a lot of these guys, is when it's okay to lunge and when you should allow the lunge. So I think we can talk sort of broadly and in Formula 1 terms. The lunge, that's the information I want from you, Callum. A, when is it okay for you to make that lunge? And what is a lunge? And B, as the defending car, when do you go, that lunge, that's coming whether I want it to or not?
Yeah, that's interesting because people get shouted at, particularly in iRacing, for that was a silly lunge. If it's clean, maybe I should define what I mean by like a clean lunge.
Do it.
It's like if you're going to shove it down the inside and essentially get to the apex before the car you're overtaking, and if you can do that leaving space, that's fine, right? So if you're going through a hairpin, let's say at Hockenheim, it's the first one I thought of, and you shove it down the inside and you essentially block the other car turning in, I think that's okay, as long as you give them time to react to that and they see you coming, which they will. It's a long braking zone. That's okay. Where you get in troubles is where you try and open a gap where the other car is already turning in and you put your car in the way and you make them either turn out or open up the steering. I think that's one we'd say is unfair. Now, sim racers often get funny about it and say, oh, that was a dive bomb. How dare you?
Yeah, what's a dive bomb?
We're here to race. Like, dive bomb is a form of a move. Like that's allowed in my book. So yeah, if you can do it without hitting the car on the outside and without making them take avoiding action, that they shouldn't have to.
Okay, so you're the defending car, Callum. Okay, so you're going to brake in a straight line, and then the braking face is going to turn into a nice curved loop to the apex, and you go out. So you're not taking the shortest possible route to the apex, actually, are you? You're braking in a straight line, then you're transferring your weight, and you're just trying to get this nice increasing arc into the apex. Me behind you, I'm going to point at the apex, and I'm going to brake with the intention of, I would make the corner. I'm not necessarily going to stop on the apex and turn in, but when is it okay? Because surely, like, there's so many situations where I could just do that every time. I could just send it into the corner. But you've started turning. I appear on the inside of you. I make you open up the steering, and you leave me space. Now, at no point in that maneuver have I hit you. You've left me all the space I need. Thank you, Callum. That's okay, isn't it?
I think so. Do you think so?
Okay, there's the very similar move at trigger warning again, Abu Dhabi 2021 after the safety car, where Verstappen goes down the inside, nowhere near the apex. It's a dive. It's one that Hamilton probably wasn't expecting. Hamilton opens up the steering. If he hadn't opened up the steering, they crash. Is that okay? Because Hamilton left him space, and Verstappen only ever moved into space where a car didn't exist.
I think so. I thought that was a fairly clean move. So, it was bold.
It's a big move.
it was a brave move, but he was on good tires. He knew how to get it stopped. I think if he'd like wheel banged with Lewis there, if he'd shot past the apex with way too much speed, like that wouldn't be okay. But he got it stopped. He got it turned. He got out the corner. In my book, that's fine.
What if Hamilton doesn't open up the steering?
Then you get into But I'd like to think Max's car was going slow enough that he could have rotated the car earlier if he needed to.
Yeah.
But he sort of put like a block on, didn't he?
Yeah.
He made Lewis back right out and ran all the way out to the curb. I think he would have been able to get that car rotated.
This is interesting, because if those guys can make those decisions in real time, then that's kind of fine, because you're like negotiating at every little point. Like, I'm coming in, I'm staying out there. Are you staying there? Oh, no. Like, I've seen you open up. That means I can now take that bit of space. Obviously, in karting, I would, if I was in Hamilton's position, I leave my car there, I let you hit me, and then the stewards can make up their own mind. But you can't do that in F1 because it's quite, the risks are much higher.
Yeah, definitely. These two, they've been racing all their life. Like, we can see the number of dive bombs they've done. They know what is a fair dive bomb, and how to do that. I mean, if Max had lunged down there and hurt his car and taken off the front wing, that would have been bad. He would have been going in knowing what he needed to get done without causing contact, and I think he did it in that instance. Yeah,
yeah. So I don't know. When you're the defending car, when do you make that decision to open up the steering, and when do you hold? I wish more drivers would let the accident happen. It's easy to say from the safety of a shed, but sometimes you go, especially when they're getting launched off the outside of turns. Sometimes Rosberg, when he was against Hamilton, I used to just be like constantly, just hold your ground, just let him hit you. Obviously, easy to say from a shed.
Yeah, I think you were talking to Brad a couple of weeks ago about this, and he's right. In almost any other form of racing, unless it's like rental karting where you really, the karts are okay, they'll take a knock. You can't ever really, unless you're Lance Stroll, like, let the crash happen, because the cost is absolutely enormous.
Yes, good point.
In sim racing, you can. Like, you can learn from those mistakes and you can fight a bit harder. Scott and I often jump on the sim after work and open up a lobby, and we just go hammer and tongs, have loads of crashes, turn off damage, and have a great time of it. And I think it's a good way to learn racecraft of what's okay, what's not okay, in a way that doesn't cost you any money. But in racing, I don't think any of them can afford that.
Well, we have a practice sessions for our RF3 championship starting in September. Email racecontrol@missedapex.net. Callum, you're going to get involved in that?
I'll be there. I've signed up.
So we do have practice races in the weeks leading up to it. And so, yeah, in that situation, you will hold your ground and let them hit you and have the argument. But when it comes to race day, you're protecting your race position. And so you don't want to let that happen. But if you've got someone who's so much more aggressive than the rest of the field, like Verstappen last year, he kind of gets a jump on everyone, a march on everyone. And my feeling is that after 2021, every driver out there needs to be racing like Verstappen.
Yeah.
If they if they continue to let it happen, do you know what I mean? I wasn't angry with Verstappen for any of that driving last season. I just thought, well, you've gone to the edge of what is enforced. Everyone needs to do that now.
I agree. I think he was the one that went, here are the rules. I'm going to drive to the very, very limit of that. And fair play. I think sometimes a lot of the drivers go quite easy in these situations. Like, they back out a bit early, or but I suppose you can understand that, the difference between one position often, particularly with these long races, like Formula One races in the grand scheme of things are quite long. They've got time to make these things up. They don't have a crash in lap 2.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And also the fact that if you're a McLaren and it's a Red Bull coming through, that's not really a position for you anyway. So that can make it look like they're sometimes being a bit soft. Whereas in a spec series and your Mazdas, I suppose every overtake, every position is a position that could be yours.
And particularly when they're doing that for like P23, it's like a 50-car grid and there's 6 of them going at it. Like, they will be pretty brutal with how they overtake. They also end up doing a clever thing where if they're in a pack, they'll entice an overtake only to make the person behind lose time so they can open up a gap. If you imagine if you're in a series, like where the toe is massive, Mazdas, Caterhams, like any of those, where the toe really, really matters. And if you're in a pack of 6 and you've got to the front of the pack, if you let the guy behind you come alongside and show him the outside all the way around the outside of the corner, only for him to block the pack for the next corner, you've gained a second, you're out the toe, you're away. You can make some ground. Whereas if you're in that 6-car pack, you're always going to be battling for the whole race, losing loads of time. So I enjoy watching them do that.
I wonder if we'll get a little bit more of that in Formula One as the regulations start to change, hopefully maintain this lesser aero wash, having the cars being able to be in the tow for longer. We might start seeing, a lot more of that kind of racing.
Yeah. Any racing like that is excellent in my book.
Speaking of any kind of racing, before you go, I do want to ask about lawnmower racing.
Yeah.
You compete in
this
lawnmower
is always
race?
A funny discussion.
Go on,
yes.
Tell us about it.
Right. So racing is really expensive, even if you were to do karting. Yes. I mean, you're looking at tens of thousands, if not, competitive karting, it's sometimes into the hundreds of thousands. The cheapest racing I could find was lawnmower racing. Interestingly, my father-in-law's done it for ages. He's won multiple world. They do a 12-hour race actually. But anyway, so there's 3 classes of lawnmowers. It essentially has to once have been a lawnmower, and then you take off the regulator, take off the blades, and turn that into a machine that you race. Okay. It's basically if you mixed like motocross and karting. It sounds very silly. It's a lot of fun. And it's where you can go racing for an entire year on like 500 quid. Like a meeting is £40
really?
Rather than if you were to go for karting.
Yeah.
Hundreds a weekend. And so it was an opportunity for last year me to get my hands dirty and build a thing. And then this year go and race it. And it's been a load of fun.
How have you done against the hardened?
I'm still at the back of the pack.
Okay.
It's like, it's a brand new thing. I've got a new engine coming in a couple of days. But it's really, really good, like hard racing, but in a way that's cheap.
So we're talking about bumpers and being surrounded by a car versus open wheel. I suppose in lawnmower racing, are you not open-legged? So if you go, do you go knee to knee?
Not really. It's kind of like they're like little sit-on lawnmowers are the ones I race, and you've got stuff around. You've got metal bits running down the side of the car, so there's a lot of door banging, but they're not doors.
Televised lawnmower racing?
No, don't be silly.
Oh, okay.
I made a few TikToks out of it, and they got some good traction. Actually, I thought people would look at that and go, "What on earth is that?"
Well, we'll make sure we link to some of your TikTok tractor racing as well as your sim racing. I keep saying tractor, lawnmower racing. But look, this has been interesting because I don't feel like there's enough discussion about the actual mechanics of racing, and it really is the soul of all motorsport, really.
It's been something that's really interesting because I've come at it from a perspective of a sim racer. I haven't been lucky enough to go racing in real life. Whereas Scott, I work with every day, has been racing all of his life. He's raced Formula One cars for a number of seasons.
Formula cars.
And so Formula One cars. He raced in Boss GP, which is a series for like older race cars, so older Formula One cars. So I think they have to be 4 years old at least.
I'd watch that.
And when he was 16, he won that championship. So he's driven like 30 Formula One cars.
Oh wow!
So taking someone from that perspective and then my sim racing perspective and us arguing. Often we argue a lot because in sim racing the rules are different.
Yeah.
You have to sort of race in. You have to leave half a track basically because you don't really know where they are. Whereas he's very much like, no, you can crowd someone off the track and it's okay. I've done it all my racing career. So that's kind of where my experience of racing rules have come from, and it's a fun thing to discuss, isn't it?
It certainly has been today, and I hope we get a chance to discuss them again. The links to Callum's TikTok, to Driver 61 stuff, some lawnmower racing and driven media will be in the show notes below. Callum McIntyre, thank you so much for your time.
Cheers, Spanners.
Right, now we turn our attention to the Junior Series. What is going on with those slightly smaller looking F1 cars? Who are these people that are racing them, and why do they suddenly appear in Formula One to a hail of excitement? I always feel like a young driver appears on the F1 radar, like Piastri, and everyone is speaking with this complete confidence that of course Piastri is going to be brilliant and everyone should want him. And I don't know who he is because I am rubbish at keeping track of the Junior Series. So to help me with that, we've got Samuel Coop from Formula Nerds. Thank you for your time, Sam. Hope things are going well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. All good my side. How are you, Spanners?
I'm good. I want to know about Formula Nerds, Sam. Tell me all about it, because you guys just keep appearing on my radar. Wherever I look, there's Formula Nerds.
Well, that's good. That's the aim. So we're 2.5 years old or so. We started as a Facebook group just before COVID hit, and kind of grew from there. Started producing original content ourselves, and then have started to get to those thresholds where we're accredited for F2, F3, W Series, and Formula E. F1 is of course the aim, but we're making good strides, and we've got a solid viewership. So exciting to see what comes next.
I was speaking to your boss man, Ollie, and we were talking about the various stages of trying to make it as a content creator, as a publication. And one big milestone is getting to the point where people take the time to tell you to bog off. You go, oh, well, at least they took the time to tell me to bog off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice when you even if you go out for a comment or interview request, it's once you get declined, you know that they're taking you seriously. Otherwise, they just ignore you usually.
Exactly. Okay, well, help me unpick a little bit about the junior series. I do catch it, and when I catch it, it's always good racing. I don't know why I don't watch it more. I think one of the things is I never know when it's on, and then I get confused between F2 and F3. But the scheduling of the junior series is an odd one. They don't go everywhere.
No, they don't. So with F2, it's 14 rounds a season, so it's the majority of the season. With F3, it's slightly fewer. It's 9 rounds this season. They tend to not be at street circuits, partly because there's 30 of them, and essentially you have teenagers in those cars. You can imagine the chaos that could cause. So it's a fair few races, but again, because of budget and scheduling, not at all 22.
All right. So have we seen less of them this season because we had such a high amount of street circuits to start with?
Yeah. So interesting with Formula 3, over the first 3 months of the season or so, there were only 3 rounds. And then in July alone, you had 3 rounds. And now we're heading into a triple header with Spa, Zandvoort and Monza for those guys.
Okay. Answer me this question then, because I've had loads of arguments with a certain member of my panel. I'm not going to name and shame Chris, but we've argued about whether a rich driver can get an advantage in the junior series. So to start with, it's a spec series. Is it completely spec?
So F3 is completely spec. F2 is still a spec series. However, there are certain types of components that you can source yourself as the competitor. So you can, it will still be the same component essentially, but it can be an equivalent or superior standard part that you can put in the car, which is sometimes why you see a big difference between teammates in F2 and their pace. So
even between teams, they might not have the same quality of engine, tyre?
So they're referred to as Type 3 parts. So tyres will be the same. I'm pretty sure the engine is actually the same, but there'll be a few subtle bits throughout the car. But it doesn't make a huge difference, but it does account for a little bit of time on the lap.
Okay, and are these things that just the drivers will personally bring in with their funding, say, rather than a team wanting to get better parts? Or do the teams vary with these Type 3 parts? No.
Yes, so it's generally the drivers. They're the ones who essentially buy their seat. They bring the sponsorship. They're the ones who get them there, as opposed to the teams. Obviously, if you have a hot young protege, teams are going to be vying for their signature, but it's the money brought by the driver as opposed to the team.
Okay, who's the best team in Formula 2, say?
So in terms of consistency and performance, there are teams that shine through year on year. Carlin do pretty well in terms of their performance. ART are usually pretty competitive. Teo Porcher being their lead driver at the moment.
So what's their incentive as a team? If it's broadly a spec series, what's their incentive to kind of go racing? How can they make their name? Why are they in it?
For the love of the sport, to promote young drivers, give them those opportunities.
Okay.
Also, there is obviously the money in it for those guys as well.
Oh, okay. So they will make money based on how well they can do. So for them, the incentive is to either get a good driver and get prize money?
As far as I'm aware, I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head, but otherwise I can't really see, why else do they do it? So
yeah. Oh, I'm wondering really how how much is money a factor is what I've been nibbling around here for, Sam. So is there still space for, say, a Lewis Hamilton who, if he was my mate at school, Lewis Hamilton would have been our rich friend because his dad was able to buy him go-karts and go go-karting. You know, even to get to that point to be noticed by McLaren, he would have been the rich kid. Is there space, though, for relatively poor financially drivers like Lewis Hamilton to come up now? Like, will we ever get a Lewis Hamilton again who couldn't personally fund going into race cars?
We will, because, again, driver academies are still very much, in fact, they're a bigger thing than they have previously been. They will often fund a talented driver's seat to help them get there. So you will see Lewis Hamiltons again, albeit it's difficult, especially with motorsport becoming increasingly expensive. But cash is king, so yeah, it does make things difficult.
And in F2, F3, how quickly and how far out do you see the future F1 stars? Like, is it obvious when you see a driver come in and you go, yeah, that guy's making it all the way?
So you can see it in F3. There is definitely talent that kind of rises to the top. There is, interestingly, an F4 driver called, I can't remember his surname, but his first name's Kimmy. Apparently no relation or no kind of...
not named after
there,
him, yeah.
There, but he is mentioned time and time again as, I think it's Kimi Antonelli, as a future star. And this is a teenager in F4. So way back, even in karting, there will be names that are increasingly kind of brought up.
Yeah, and so for us Formula One guys, us ignorant Formula One guys who don't watch enough of other series, guilty. I have a family. It's not my fault. It's all their fault. So, I mean, Piastri turns up and suddenly everyone's fighting over him. Everyone, after he won his F2 title, was saying, oh, it's such a shame he's not in F1 now and hasn't got a seat, but then can't race in F2 again. So how big a deal is this guy from someone who covers junior series? Like, was Piastri like obviously a superstar?
Yes. He came in and won the F3 championship, first time of asking. And as you rightly said, with F3 and F2, if you win the championship, you've got to move on. Moved up to F2 and won the championship again, first time of asking. That does happen from time to time. You do see rookies in and amongst it. In fact, the F3 leader this season, Isaac Hadjar, he's equal on points with his fellow countryman Victor Martins, but Hadjar is a rookie. So you do see it, but Piastri very much does seem the real deal.
So does winning it, this is almost a stupid question, but if you want to be taken seriously, say, by the F1 teams, do you need to come in on your first season and win it? Obviously, there are drivers who've won it after 3, 4, 5 seasons.
So you don't need to win it straight away. Take Logan Sargent, for example, who you may have heard his name floated around.
With Williams,
he's going to be he's part of their driver academy. He will be taking a free practice session at the Circuit of Americas later this year. He, in his first season in F3, came third. He actually ran Piastri very, very close to the title. Should have won the title. Ended up falling behind Pourchaire into third in the standings. His second year in F3, he finished seventh. Had an off year for him. Has come into F2, first time of asking, is third in the championship, and is really impressing. So everyone's path is different, but you do want to be winning the series. So
is there an incentive if you're winning the F2 series, you've got the attention of an F1 team, you say to the F1 team, do you know what, I'm just gonna ease up a bit so that I can race in F2 next season. I'm gonna just make sure I don't win the championship.
Probably not, because these are all fierce competitors.
Yeah, that's right.
To even get to that stage of racing, you've got to be really kind of one track minded in that sense. And you hear drivers who are in their first season F2 who are doing well, not setting the world light or looking at winning the championship, who are still saying, I only want to be here for a year. The problem for F1 is where do you place those guys when there aren't enough seats on the grid? Increasingly, careers are going longer.
Yeah.
Nick De Vries, Oscar Piastri, these are names who haven't yet had their F1 debuts.
Yeah, people are definitely people are racing for a couple of decades at the moment. So this is where we need a 30-car grid. We need 30-car grids. We need teams like Hesketh, just coming on there on a wing and a prayer, just so that we can showcase this talent. Or I think, could we, as if I'm in charge of the FIA, could we do more to promote the Junior Series as an event? It almost feels like I struggle to casually just know when it's on. It's not being thrust in my face when it's on. Is that almost deliberate because I don't want to put pressure on them? Or
I don't know if it's deliberate. I think there is an increasing focus on those series, much like, not that it's an F1 feeder series, but this year IndyCar seemed to have started to take off more and more in Europe, and there's more of a focus over here in the UK on that. Maybe it's because drivers like Callum McIntyre, who previously fared well in F2, are in that series. Part of the problem you've mentioned before in terms of scheduling, these races are sometimes on at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Who's up at that time?
Exactly. But if you're actually at an event, I was at Silverstone earlier this year, you're walking into the circuit at 8:30 in the morning and there's F3 guys on track and you're thinking, oh, that's early. This is a whole day of...
Yeah, I'm still washing down my toothpaste with coffee. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's difficult though, because the whole race weekend, there's so much to fit in. When else are you gonna run those guys? But yeah, I think there is an increasing focus as people start to kind of hear about these talents who aren't quite getting the opportunities in F1.
I would like, instead of focusing on sprint races, go, well, look at the calendar that's already there and promote that. And it's good to see W Series getting a little bit more prominence this season as well. And hopefully that will continue with the Junior Series. Find out all your Junior Series news and needs by going and checking out Formula Nerds. We'll have a link in the show notes below. Where are you on TikTok and Instagram, Sam?
So we're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, of course. We have played with TikTok in the past, so we may be back there with a bang, hopefully, because all the Gen Zers love a bit of TikTok.
Got to be on TikTok.
I think
yeah.
we're maybe a bit past it, Spanners. But
speak for yourself, Samuel. How dare you? Samuel Coop will put your personal social media in the show notes as well. Thank you very much for your time and giving us an insight into Formula Nerds and the Junior Series.
Thank you very much.
Now then, to finish off today's show, I'm taking a bit of a risk. As an egotistical content creator, I want to instinctively hate anyone who has success in my general kind of field. So I really, really, really hate my next guest. He's everywhere. He interviews everyone. He gets the best guests. He's got 1 billion followers and always finds the newly opened till at supermarket checkouts. It is Tom McLuskey, a.k.a. Tommo F1. Hello, mate. How's it going?
How have you nailed it so precisely and so spot on, Spanners? I'm incredibly impressed. And as a Chelmsford native, not too far from your neck of the woods, you know what to expect from someone like me. Just pure scum.
Pure scum. Well, I'm a street rat from just down the road from you as well. But my bio is pretty accurate of you. You've got 1 billion followers. You get brilliant interviews. You get all the girls. You smell fantastic. It's been a real sort of YouTube content success story.
It's been quite the whirlwind. I was an absolute nobody this time 2.5 years ago, and now all of a sudden I'm incredibly relevant and incredibly, my forehead is even shinier now than it used to be.
If you do say so yourself. I thought you were going to say I'm still irrelevant, but I've got a good YouTube channel. But yes, it's been a space in F1 where people can come through with interesting content, and I think you do a lot of what I try to do, which is build a community of like-minded people around your content.
Precisely, mate. I think I've always loved talking about sport. I used to do football content on YouTube. I've now moved that to F1. And I've just always, wanted to, I think YouTube can be an extension of the own conversations you have with your friends. And I just want to talk about the sport how I would with my friends and in a way that I think is approachable, and a lot of other people have jumped on board and seem to kind of get on with it. So yeah, that's the only thing I've ever aimed to do, is just put my opinion out there, right or wrong. It's sport. Everyone's got their take, and this is me.
Let's see if you take this as an insult. I don't think you will, because I think you probably know that, like, you've got much more of a modern streamer vibe the necessarily like a contenty broadcaster vibe that I try to do, where I write scripts myself and try and sound all posh.
Yeah, I think I just kind of fell into creating videos in the first place just because I wanted to learn how to edit videos and make videos, and I've done zero in terms of any kind of formal training in how to broadcast or speak, or like none of that, because I guess I've been able to build that over the years, this kind of ability to just be myself on camera, because actually I think that's quite difficult when you just get any random person, stick a camera in front of them, they crap themselves. You know what I mean? I'm able to do that now, which is great, and I'll just carry that into my content.
Yeah, no, and that's what's great about yours, is what you see is what you get. Like with me, it's all lies. You know, I turn the
facade.
stream. Yeah, I turn the stream off, then I go and kick my cat and just be secretly.
Who are you, Kurt Zuma?
Bigoted and horrible. But I wanted to talk to you about F1 fandom in general. But firstly, you've been to more F1 races and tracks than me, so I am jealous. But I think as F1 fans, it is actually hard to go to a variety of tracks. Like, you need a significant wedge. But you've been to Canada and Miami, which is amazing. So Miami must have been this year.
Indeed it was, yeah. No, I was lucky to get an IG DM that wasn't fake spam for once, and it was an invite from a brand, shout out Eat Sleep, and they sent me out to Miami, which was an amazing opportunity. And it was it was like you say, there's one event per country unless you're Italy, so it is incredibly difficult to get to a variety of races. But yeah, Silverstone's fantastic. Canada as well, absolute top tier, mate. Brilliant, would recommend.
Yeah, Montreal is one that I used to love, but then I think I loved it because when it's good, it's very, very good. But it is prone to quite a few duds, isn't it? It's like if there's a big crash, if there's rain, if there's safety cars, it really does provide something. But it can sort of settle down, can't it? But being trackside, seeing the cars going through those chicanes, I'm guessing is pretty spectacular.
Yeah, it's an all or nothing circuit, isn't it? And you've got like the Wall of Champions is a prime example of that. It doesn't feel like a street circuit. But it is, and it's that kind of nice hybrid. I've always loved Circuit du Villeneuve. It's always been one of my favourite tracks on the calendar. You are right. You know, it does sometimes produce some duds, but you get a bit of changeable rain. I mean, it was absolutely roasting there this year, so we got nicely sunburnt, me and my fiance at the time, who got married 2 days after in Canada, hence why we were there. And amazing place. It's just such a weird environment as well. It's this little island, and you've got all these lakes, and it's like a beautiful area. It's so different to Silverstone, which is just a big field in the middle of nowhere. It feels like a festival. This feels much more kind of, it's close to town as well.
I was going to ask.
I would recommend it. You got to get there.
Quite a lot to do. So like you can just like then nip into town afterwards. Because that's the big problem with Silverstone is you've got to commit to being there all day. You've got to like park like 50 miles away and get on a sweaty bus in the middle of summer, and then you're plonked there and at the mercy of the venue.
You're just stuck in the middle of like Milton Keynes. It's just like, why? Like you literally just jump on the metro from like Montreal, like Central Station, and it's like 2-3 stops. It's an absolute breeze. It takes a bit of time getting out, but compared to Silverstone, it's so good. You have to go, Spanish.
Whenever I think about going to Silverstone, there's always that deep breath. The thing that puts me off absolutely the most is the transport in. Not that they care, because they get like 500 million people in every single time. But I am tempted to try and mix in a North American karting event around the Canadian Grand Prix one year, to try and kind of, I don't know, make it a bit of a tax write-off, I guess, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't regret it, and that also, that was, I make content out there, so
exactly,
it counts, right?
Yeah, it's technically work. Let's talk about F1 fandom though, because as content creators at our kind of level, we're not really bound by journalistic standards where we have to come across as being completely neutral or not support any drivers. But it's a lie when those people do that, because everybody supports someone a little bit, and you're not afraid as a content creator to say, I like this driver or that team.
Oh, Alex Albon all the way, mate. I mean, you know what I mean? I think it's one of them that, you enjoy sport, you get into sport. Again, I'm a big football fan, and it's more following teams. I think in F1, it's more following individuals typically, unless you're Tifosi and part of the Ferrari fandom. I think it's much more kind of ingrained in human beings, and I think that can make things even more polarizing at times when your fandom is circulating individuals. But again, like I say, I want this conversation, the conversation I want to have with my mates isn't just stipulated in I'm going to defend my favorite driver at all times. Yes, we all have our biases. We all have our own perspective of how we look at things. I probably take in a bit more information around Alex than other people do because he's my favorite driver. Yes. But at the end of the day, I just want to have an open conversation. And you know what? That's where you get tripped up sometimes, because it's some people who look for it through the lens of their favorite driver and only that lens, and some other people who look through it through the broader sport, I guess. And I try and do the latter, I guess, as best as I can as a normal human being.
It's interesting you saying the main difference is you taking in more information. So I have this with Perez, and especially, he's been up against, one of the top drivers in Formula One. And so obviously been a bit of a rough time. But I will take in information about what kind of setups they're on, and if they're on a different strategy, or if they're trying out potentially legal flaws. Sorry, alleged. Did I say alleged? I said alleged legal flaws. Okay, good. I'll take my tin hat off. But you're right, because you take in more information, sometimes that feels like, you're just finding excuses for your favourite driver. And you must have had this with Albon as well, actually. Very similar situation to Perez as the Red Bull number 2. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, you're not going to go looking for numbers that, because I think when you dig into the numbers around, relative to Max performance wise, in 2020, he didn't do that much worse of a job
here we go.
than Checo did last year. But if you look into the win percentage, points percentage, blah, blah, blah. But obviously I'm going to go and find that information because he's my favorite driver, and I want to understand. I'm not going to look into that kind of information with a Lance Stroll, for example, a driver that I don't dislike. I just don't really have any opinion about.
Yeah, that's right. And so, as long as you are declaring that out up front, I respect that, and I enjoy content more when I know who people are gunning for. There's certain mainstream commentators or presenters who you can tell they've got like seething resentment towards a driver, and they never say it, and you can there's this one person in particular, you can hear them earning the ability to put down this certain driver. So they go, he's so good. He's so good in these situations. He's brilliant in that. And like, he's saved up the credit so that he can go, that's where he sucks and he's awful and I hate him and hope he crashes. But do you know what I mean? So, but because they're not honest about that, you have to sit and pick it apart.
Yeah, and that's ultimately, I think, where a lot of cynicism comes in, because especially when you're putting your opinions out there on YouTube or on Twitter or whatever platform, you do have people that, and again, look, I just think that's quite normal and quite human. Like, if there's a football team that you don't particularly like and they have a bad decision, go against them, you're not going to really care unless, like, in the same way as if it's your team. And there's so much nuance to it. And again, I just think there's no... If you're going to choose to put yourself out there, like I do, like you do, like any content creator does, be that YouTube videos, be that just posting on Twitter, it doesn't matter. Like, you're going to get people who look at what you say through, their own lens, and everyone's got their own perspective, and people are going to choose to interpret what you've said in the worst possible way. But you kind of have to roll with that, because you are choosing to put yourself out there into the public ecosphere, and nobody knows. Like for all you know, I could be like, this could all be lies. This could all be lies, and I could be playing everyone, and I could actually hate Alex Albon. But obviously that's not true.
You could just pick it. And look, in content creation, for example, me and Matt will make sure that we're not overly agreeing. So if he's got an opinion about Ocon, and I didn't really care, but because he defends Ocon in the way that you defend Albon and I defend Perez, I will just sit there and attack Ocon, just for the sake of content and for the sake of for the sake of challenging his opinion. But I'm wondering, I've just looked it up, 99,948 followers on Twitter.
I'm so close to 100K.
Ooh, so close. I'm glad we caught you before you went over before you came too big.
Yeah, I would have rejected the interview if I'd have been too important.
100K. But have you found, like, well, I certainly have, that I now am different online, because the instinct, if someone criticises Albon or Perez or Hamilton or something like that, is to go, nuh-uh, because of the things. But when you've got, like, you get masses of replies to every post, you have to be pretty careful, I guess, and selective.
Yeah, that's the thing, because I never want to... I never want to say things that I don't believe and say things that I don't think. I always want to be as true to my own opinions as I can. What I will say is now that the platform's a lot bigger, I do think more about what I say before I say it, because again, like you said, like when no one's watching and
no
one cares, like no one's you can tweet more emotionally, you can just say things off the cuff that you might reflect and actually be like, oh, in the heat of the moment I didn't probably mean that so much, but I think that there's a responsibility for myself to kind of just take a bit of a step back sometimes when it is a more controversial, which obviously last year was full of controversy. And I think every time I tweeted about what was going on last year, I did give it more thought than I would typically, because I think Twitter, I used to use just to shotgun things out there and just boom, boom. But like as soon as I'm thinking something, bang. But actually, I think because you're putting it out into the ecosphere where anyone and everyone can see what you're saying, I think you owe it to yourself more than anyone to think a bit more about what you're saying before you put it out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're a relatively young man, late 20s, without giving too much away.
Just about holding on to my 20s.
Just about relevant, with a big following. And there's a fair amount of big accounts like yours in general, but in F1 as well, that can really lead the conversation. And one of the things we were talking about offline was the toxicity in F1 fandom at the moment. It's spilt over into the tracks at certain venues. But my belief is it has started on social media. So, shed mugs like me got less of responsibility. But there are accounts that aren't as nice as yours, that are as influential, that will just go all out on the attack because it's addictive. You get a lot of likes, you get a lot of retweets if you do stray a little bit that way.
Yeah, I think operating, especially if you are going to align yourself to one particular driver, it's drivers more than teams. Let's be honest. Align yourself with one particular driver. Build up a fan base within that echo chamber. You've got that. Those other people who are just gonna blindly defend and blindly take side of their driver or their team or whatever happens, and then the other people do the same, and then those tweets will like catch wind of the opposite like echo chamber, and that's when it all kicks off. Because as soon as one picks it up and quote tweets it, then it's gone into that other echo chamber, and then you've got the two echo chambers attacking each other. I'm in the middle trying to be objective, and then people telling me I'm flip-flopping because I don't permanently align with one side. And then it just causes, and nobody wins at the end of the day because everyone's just wasting their life arguing on Twitter.
Yeah. Quote tweeting is the absolute worst. Even if you've only got a few hundred followers, you've probably got followers who follow the same drivers and things that you do. So your little quote tweet gets picked up by 3 or 4 other people that quote tweet. And what I found was, especially last season, I would have a tweet something about the Verstappen-Hamilton battle. I'd have a lovely kind of 20 minutes, and then it would get picked up by like the opposite echo chamber, and then it would be hell. But actually, if I was ever critical of Lewis Hamilton, and I think as fans, especially as football fans, and I think you'll relate to this as a West Ham fan, as a fan of a terrible team, you're more critical of your team when they are failing and doing badly.
Oh my God.
And so
this is the thing as well. I think so many fans, and this goes as much as football fans, and I'm sure of any sport. To me, it's never been interesting. It's never been, drilled into me as a fan of West Ham growing up. And again, I had drivers that I was fans of throughout F1, but West Ham's been a permanent fixture in my entire life.
I'm so sorry.
I know it's never been drilled into me to like blindly, because. Up. If they do well, I'm happy. If they don't do well, I'll call it out. And that's the approach I've carried on to, Alex Albon. I love him, but he makes mistakes. What's up? He was driving like in Monaco. Like I can call him out on that, because to me and this is what I say, the distinction between fandom, which is, what I consider myself. I have my favorites, but I look at the sport more objectively, and I try and like take in everything into account. And then standom, which is just standing your favorite and defending them blindly going.
Okay. Tommo, I'm 41. What I keep hearing this phrase "stan," and it's been going on.
You know where Stan came from?
No, I've got no.
The old Eminem song, back from the.
Oh, is that all it is?
Yeah, that's where it came from.
I thought it was like super fan was my guess. Okay, so someone who's like an intensely obsessive fan.
You've seen the music video, right?
Yeah, I've seen the music video. Yeah,
that's where it comes from.
Oh man, it's one of those things. All the kids were saying it, but I didn't want to seem uncool. But yes, there's people who are fans and then can be critical. Like I'm sure you're critical of Albon throwing away that win by turning in on Lewis Hamilton at Interlagos, and I'm sure you can see that for the irrational poor driving.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, all right, Spanners, I'm sure I can.
He's got the Romford point going on now. He's pointing at me down the Zoom call. And then the Stan, that I now feel confident as a phrase to use, where almost your identity revolves around that your driver always being good, always being correct, always being right. And that is just, it comes across unhinged.
But also, kind of one thing I do want to say is that, look, people are entitled to follow, and if you want to, you want to follow the sport through a certain driver and you want to be a Stan, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. And I think there are, platforms and there's your Twitter accounts and there's podcasts and there's YouTube channels that appeal more to that and will follow certain drivers. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when it all comes together, and typically I think that standems are more likely to harbor more kind of extreme people who will go and attack and send DMs and make threats and be just horrible. Like, I think that there is a space for people to follow the sport however they want to. There's no fundamental issue with that. It's when it does boil over and everyone starts attacking each other that I just think, just grow up.
Yeah, and it looks like it is kind of spilling into the real world. Obviously, I'm sure most sane people are condemning the things like burning hats. Like that's a really dark path to go down. Like what's next? The next step after that isn't pretty.
No, it's ridiculous. And again, like I thought it was good that Max called that out, and how much of that came from him, how much of that he was told, we don't know. They're F1 drivers. I'm sure they're told to do a lot of things, but that's just, it's just stupid. Like, what are you doing? The connotations attached to that also are very, very dark. Yeah, whether or not the person meant that or not. No, and it should be called out. I think there's certain things you can debate, like for example the booing. I've never had a massive problem personally with booing, but again, I'm a football fan, so that's just the norm. I think there's a conversation around that, but I think there are certain things that clearly overstep the line and clearly need calling out.
I've sort of moved on that because I like a good-natured boo. And I feel like you've paid your money. If it is a well-intentioned boo, which I always felt it was, like against the German drivers, we're booing you because you're brilliant and you're ruining F1 for us by being really good. So, when Verstappen broke down at Silverstone, of course, every fibre in my body wanted to boo him, but I'd have also bought him a pint in the same breath. Now that the booing has taken on, I think, a bit of a deeper connotation, feels a little bit more sinister. I now don't want to add my voice to the booing with my good-natured booing.
And that's the thing, exactly what you say. It's like that. There's booing in its own as a thing in isolation isn't good or bad, but it's the intent, and it depends on what intent you think it carries, and maybe it does carry certain intent in different areas. And again, intent that's so much of the conversation is around intent, like, and it's impossible when you've got 140 characters or whatever in Twitter to summarize any possible intent to encapsulate it perfectly.
And 100 million voices.
It's not doable.
Yeah, 100 million voices as well, and judging people's tone, judging what mood people are in. But like even we were talking about when you try to be more biased or try and be more constructive. As a massive Lewis Hamilton fan, whenever I'm critical of Lewis Hamilton, I think one time I was critical of a radio call that he made. And I'm sometimes critical of his approach to qualifying, not so much anymore. Then I'll get called out massively by Hamilton fans, and I got in this quote tweet cycle where hundreds and hundreds of Hamilton fans were coming at me, and I'm like, every tweet, I'm like, blue on blue, man. Blue, same team, same team. But yeah, it's a shame because I want to be able to enjoy those online communities. They could be so good.
And that's why you can never win. If you choose to align with one side, then you always have that side backing you. But then you're always going to be attacked from the other side, and also you're not really, as far as I'm concerned, if you're just permanently aligning yourself with one side, whatever happens, then you're just not being honest to yourself in terms of looking at the sport objectively. And then if you try and be neutral, which again, I'm only interested in looking at the sport from a neutral point of view, because that's where it's interesting to me to have a discussion, to have a multifaceted discussion about things. Then you'll get heat from all sides, to probably less of an extent. And you've seen over kind of this has obviously been a huge subject over, particularly towards the end of last year, but it's still kind of coming up continuously, and it's not gonna. I just think cynicism, like, it's so cynical on Twitter. It's so cynical once your tweet gets in the hands of the people who, you know, have this kind of extreme point of view on things, and the cynicism just needs to go, man. Again, I think it's something I'm more conscious of now that I do have a platform and I've got a lot of people listening to what I say, is that, you know, I should be more respectful. There's been videos in the past at the early stage of the channel where, you know, I'd be saying about how, like, at the time I just felt like Latifi and Stroll just didn't have a personality, and I'd kind of go on in things that I just, in reflection, I was just like, actually, no, like, I've learned a bit more about him. I actually think Lance Stroll in particular, I think he's hilarious. Actually, I think he's good crack when you get him on a good day. And yeah, it's just like, it's just unnecessary. But I think even for me, like, it, and I wasn't someone who went around being toxic, but even for me, I think, you know, it took having that platform for me to really think about it a bit more, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I can definitely look back. I can pull out 3 examples where I went, oh, maybe I was a bit toxic there. Like, I still think this is funny, but I was trying to cultivate this image where Daniel Ricciardo was secretly evil behind the scenes, a little bit like Lord Business, you know, in Lego Movie. But anyway, that's by the by. But then you go, well, actually, as more people listen, yeah, maybe that is a bit toxic, and I'm adding to it. But look, thanks, Tommo. All I really wanted to do was invite you on and just speak to, you know, a more successful but a peer nonetheless in my creation space, and just have a bit of a rant, because wouldn't it be nice if we could all just be a tiny bit nicer on social media? And I include me on that, because nice of you to kind of admit and remind me that we made mistakes getting to the point where we went, oh, maybe we should be less toxic and horrible.
We're all human, mate. We're all trying our best. But as long as, you know, you got the heart in the right place, which, you know, I just think, I think it's the cynicism and the skepticism that is very, very high online. And it's just, you know, it's not assume the worst in everyone all the time, because actually most people are good, I think, inherently. Yeah.
99,950 now. It's gone up in the time that we've been chatting. So go and follow Tommo. He's at Tommo F1. That's the rubbish hand. I didn't really realize it's at TW.
Tommo. Twitter, Tommo.
I don't like that. It's not as bad as having an underscore, but
you know what? No one liked it, but since I changed it, I've like 3-folded my Twitter following. So
okay, so
and we're talking about it. So, you know,
Tommo F1, TWOMMO F1. And so if we get him over the 100,000, then we share in that success. It's basically us.
You get my Twitter play button.
Yeah, right? That's the one. I don't know. Yeah? I don't know what that is, but glad to make a new friend. Hope that we can do some kind of like Twitter spacey call-in thing at some point in the future, and maybe even drop back into the shed again and give us some hot takes, Tommo.
That sounds good to me, mate. No, thank you very much for having me on, Spanner. It's been an absolute pleasure.
There you go. Go and follow him at Tommo F1, Tom McLuskey, a.k.a. the phenomenon that is the internet, Tommo F1. Well, that's the end of our summer buffet. We are now back towards the business end of the summer break, where we'll be looking forward to the Spa Grand Prix. Of course, we will be in with a race review from 8 o'clock. So the race review will be there ready for your Monday morning commute. I hope you've had a great summer, and I hope you'll like and subscribe and do all the things you're supposed to do. Leave us an iTunes review and consider supporting us at patreon.com/Missed Apex. Our iRacing season is starting again in September. If you want to be involved in our F3 Cup, make sure you email racecontrol@missedapex.net. But wherever we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.